Elizabeth is a social worker and educator with extensive experience over the past 2 decades supporting children, youth, and adults facing complex illness, uncertainty, and grief. She was privileged to become the first palliative social worker at one of the largest cancer treatment centers in the world and specialized in therapeutic interventions on acute palliative care unit and the palliative outpatient clinics. Wanting to broaden access to palliative care in the community, Elizabeth launched her private practice in 2015, offering psychosocial support to individuals, families, and groups of all ages facing illness, uncertainty, and grief. Facilitating interprofessional education since 1999, Elizabeth was honored to be appointed as an assistant clinical professor adjunct in 2016 to the Department of Family Medicine, Division of Palliative Care at McMaster University, and in 2017 became the clinical director of Camp Aaron Hamilton, a free bereavement camp for children. Before we begin the presentation, I did want to welcome all of those who are viewing the presentation via live stream. And I'd like to ask those in the room at the end, if we have time for questions, to please use the microphone so that those participating via live stream are able to hear us. And so now would you all please join me in welcoming Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your time with me today. And thank you for that lovely introduction and for the invitation to share my time with you today. And that's all that I'm going to be doing. I don't profess to be an expert, but I'm really honored to share my experience working and supporting families of all ages facing life-limiting illness, at end of life, and into bereavement. So for the next little while, I'd really like to just focus on some of the things that have really resonated with me over the past almost 25 years I've been working in healthcare. Certainly, I had the honor of volunteering and interning and working in a number of different practice settings before I landed in healthcare, namely domestic violence, child welfare, addiction treatment, corrections, and certainly actually working right downtown here in Toronto with a homeless population. But it was when I landed in crisis intervention in the East End, Toronto, in an emergency department, that it really all came together for me. Certainly, regardless of whatever practice setting we work in, we know that illness, grief, and loss don't discriminate. And certainly my role as a social worker was really to step up and do what I could to support families. So from there, I worked in general internal medicine at a West End academic medical center before I ended up in psychosocial oncology and eventually palliative care. I'm grateful now to share my experience in community practice, working as a private practitioner, but so much of my work now, and always has been, about collaboration. It's about community. So certainly I'm really grateful to be here as part of this community today, and for everyone sharing their time online. So again, I think a big part of our role as social workers and social service workers is certainly demystifying issues and providing education. Certainly my role as well, and the work that we all do, is how we provide compassionate care. In my context, it's following diagnosis of a serious illness, throughout the illness experience, and into end of life. And also exploring different opportunities to promote care and access to care within our own practice, innovative ways to deliver that care, but also across communities. And I'm going to share some resources today as well, if you're curious about training or education for yourself in hospice palliative care, but also referring children, youth, or adults you may be working to support. I'm doing 2 different systems here, so here we go. I think this is a big part of certainly our work, right? That elephant in the room. And certainly there could be herds of elephants depending on our practice setting, certainly many issues. There are lots of taboos, certainly in my field. The elephant in the room can be a diagnosis itself, be it cancer or ALS. It can certainly be the treatment and trying to cope with side effects, whether that's loss of mobility, loss of intimacy. It can certainly be the isolation that individuals and families experience following a diagnosis. For many people, they talk about feeling invisible and incredibly isolated after they've been diagnosed throughout their illness experience and into bereavement. Many people hope that their friends and family will step up at a time of need, and many report the fact that they're just shocked by the fact that they feel isolated and friends and family step back for fear of not knowing what to say or how to say it. So individuals and families themselves can feel so very isolated in this time. And in fact, many of the kids and teens I work with, for those of you working with kids and teens across settings and sectors, will know that when they have a parent diagnosed or they themselves are coping with a life-limiting illness, are often the subject of bullying at school. So it's important to speak to these issues and to demystify them. So certainly what that means, well, for me, working in healthcare for almost 25 years, it's this. Certainly that acute care hospitals focus on short-term episodic care and interventions, thankfully, which is extraordinary. But the reality is these interventions are aimed at curing, which really creates an environment where death is seen as a failure or death is denied. Now, it's an important consideration because what does that mean for people facing a life-limiting illness or where cure is not possible? So what does that mean for us as social workers and social service workers supporting people who are trying to find healing, even in the absence of a cure? I wanted to share this statistic. This is actually from a Canadian initiative called The Way Forward. I think it's important to recognize because many clinicians talk about feeling a sense of discomfort or not knowing what to say. I wanted to let you know that you're not alone, and that this study actually highlights the fact that less than 1/4 of Canadian physicians and nurses are actually experienced and comfortable talking about planning for illness and end-of-life care with individuals and their families. Less than 1/4. Does that surprise anyone? When people are looking to their care team for answers, for direction, for guidance, and for planning, if their care providers are not comfortable and certainly inexperienced, where do they turn to for answers and information and support and resources? Now, there's a multitude of reasons for this, and hopefully this is going to begin to change, and slowly but surely it already is. But I wanted to let you know, for those of you who are unsure of what to say or how to say it, you're not alone. But certainly this presents a challenge for people facing life-limiting illness. The reality being that it's the unpredictable nature of living with a terminal or life-limiting illness. Because the reality is that there were reversible and irreversible events, and certainly declining health, interwoven with periods of stability. So people facing a life-limiting illness live with knowing that death will come, but not knowing where or when. So imagine what that's like for that individual and family, and who do they turn to for support and answers? I think the important consideration is, when does dying in fact begin? I think the answer to that is unique to probably everyone in this room. Does dying begin the moment we're born? Or when a fatal condition begins? Is it when that condition might be recognized by a physician, or when a person's told of his or her fatal condition? Is it when that person actually realizes and accepts the facts that they're dying? Or is it when nothing more can be done to reverse the condition or preserve life? Now, certainly I think it's important to recognize that it's actually a process. And this highlights a study that interviewed bereaved carers, and what they indicated was important to them in supporting a good death. And really the literature points to the fact that much of the literature is focused on death itself as a single event. But really it's all of those experiences about reaching awareness, good communication, and symptom management that really implies it's a process that makes a difference in terms of promoting quality of life. And this process can and should take place in the days, weeks, months, and even years before the death. It's possible. But it's really these processes where people feel supported and informed that make a difference in their quality of life. And it's where each one of us as social workers and social service workers have an active role to play. Now, certainly it's important to recognize that while commonalities exist in terms of how people respond to a diagnosis of a serious illness, to facing dying, grief, and loss, each one of us is unique as an individual. While there are commonalities in responses, that how we respond is unique to each one of us. That's certainly based on a number of factors. Considering someone's stage in the life cycle or their illness history, whether they've had a chronic illness for some time or whether they were recently diagnosed. Certainly it's also possible that they were recently diagnosed with advanced disease. Loss history is an important consideration as well. Has someone experienced death or a number of deaths before in their immediate circle? Have they experienced the loss of intimacy or identity or even mobility? Coping style and personality certainly is an important consideration in terms of how people receive and process information. Absolutely, cultural values are an important consideration, as is spirituality or religious affiliation, and how we can best support people along those lines. It's important for us as well as social workers and social service workers to know whether someone has the presence of a supportive network or the absence of one. And certainly understanding if there are additional stressors that individuals and families are facing from time of diagnosis throughout the illness and into end of life and bereavement. Supporting people as they face grief and loss. Now, certainly it's a reminder, and this is from Dr. Kenneth Doka. For those of you who don't know about him, I encourage you to take a look at his work, his research. It's a reminder that grief is a reaction to loss. Grief and grieving is a lifelong process. And certainly while many people often confuse it as a reaction to death, it's really just a very natural reaction to loss. It's certainly when we lose any significant form of attachment, grief is really the process of adjusting. And it's a reminder that grief can begin at time of diagnosis with a serious illness. So how do we best support people in coping with their grief and the various losses they'll experience? Now, this next slide actually highlights a brilliant online resource called What's Your Grief? If you haven't taken a look at it yet, I encourage you to do so. This isn't only for individuals and families who may be grieving, this is also for clinicians and educators. But what this does is highlight the secondary losses people may experience. Now, while this graphic specifically speaks to the loss of the person who died, it's also a reminder that these losses can begin following diagnosis of a serious illness, whether that's loss of identity, or role, or income, or intimacy. How do we best support people from time of diagnosis throughout their experience, at time of death and into bereavement, to cope with not only the primary loss, but the secondary losses that accompany a complex illness? Again, highlighting the fact that grief is not a disorder. This is from Dr. Earl Groman. Grief is not a disease or a sign of weakness. Knowing those of you in the room with me being social workers and social service workers, thinking when we support people and someone starts to cry in your presence, what's the first thing that person often tends to say as soon as they start to cry? I'm sorry, right? Culturally, there's so much stigma around grief and grieving and loss. People should unapologetically have the opportunity and safe space to grieve. Crying is an expression of that loss. And without fail, when someone apologizes for crying in front of me, I gently say, you have nothing to apologize for. It's a reminder that grief is that emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity. As Dr. Groman talks about, it's the price we pay for love. And the only cure for grief is actually to grieve. Now, certainly, how do we as social workers and social service workers step up and support people who are grieving following diagnosis throughout their illness and into bereavement? This study actually highlights the fact when they interviewed individuals and families facing a life-limiting illness, what they rated as most significant in terms of their ability to cope was actually the emotional experience of care. As social workers and social service workers, that's where we shine. But what they also identified, now taking a look at this is many of our job descriptions. These other issues that were important to them, access to practical help, being able to connect with specialists to answer questions and speak to concerns. Interprofessional communication. As we all know, regardless of setting or sector, many practitioners practice within silos. So how do we bring clinicians and teams together to be able to answer questions and support families throughout this experience? Coordination of resources is also essential. But certainly it's the recognition that it's about creating safe spaces for people to express their grief and their loss. But certainly in all of this, celebrating opportunities for joy and love. It's also a reminder that end of life presents a crisis for the whole family. We're not just caring for the person who's been diagnosed with the illness, we're caring for their loved ones. And to not consider the impact on their loved ones is honestly short-sighted. So what does it mean to care for entire families? This doesn't mean we do this work alone, but it's certainly important to collaborate with teams, with other resources, with organizations, to make sure people are connected to access support. What kind of support? I'd like to share my discipline, my specialty with you. Hospice palliative care. There are lots of stigmas and misconceptions about palliative care. Palliative care was actually introduced to Canada in 1974. It was not that long ago. And it stemmed from the modern hospice movement in the UK and the recognition that people were suffering at end of life and it needed to be done differently. People, their families, their loved ones needed support physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. So taking a team approach back in the 70s, the recognition was how do we support people at time of death or leading up to end of life? But now, hospice palliative care has evolved. The focus is not just end-of-life care, it's about supporting people from time of diagnosis with a complex illness. It's called a palliative approach to care. And really, I wanted to share this definition with you, taken from the Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association, that hospice palliative care is appropriate for any person and or family living with or at risk of developing a life-limiting illness due to any diagnosis with any prognosis, regardless of age, at any time they have unmet expectations or needs and are prepared to accept care. It can certainly complement and enhance disease-modifying therapy, meaning that if someone has a diagnosis of cancer, they can come and see their oncologist, and then they can also go see the palliative care team in an outpatient clinic setting the same day. They don't have to give up access to care. But it can also be the sole focus of their care. It's certainly a team sport. So meaning that we rely on the blending and blurring of different disciplines and specialties to come together and really promote holistic care for that individual and their family. It treats all active issues and does the utmost to prevent new issues from occurring. And again, much like the work that we do, it takes a holistic approach, meaning that it addresses the physical, psychological, social, spiritual, and practical issues and an individual and family's associated expectations, needs, hopes, and fears. It's certainly about how we best prepare people to cope with end of life, focusing on autonomy and self-determination. But it's also about coping with the grief and loss from time of diagnosis, throughout the experience, and certainly trying to do our utmost to support families in the experience of bereavement. So what does that look like? In terms of providing compassionate care. This is actually a quote from Pema Chodron. She talks about the fact that someone needs to encourage us not to brush aside what we feel, not to be ashamed of the love and grief that it arouses in us, not to be afraid of pain. Someone needs to encourage us that this soft spot in us could be awakened, and that to do this would change our lives. Now, what does that mean if perhaps you've never been at the bedside or in the clinic or in the home of someone who's facing end of life, or even receiving news about a serious or incurable illness? I wanted to share this quote from Kirsten DeLeo. This is actually taken from a brilliant book, a compilation of articles written by clinicians, researchers, and educators working in palliative and end-of-life care. This quote is absolutely true for myself, that those who are dying have taught me 3 essential things: to show up even when I don't know what to say or do, to be myself, and to not be afraid to care. And while this quote is specific in terms of the work that we do in hospice palliative care, I think this is true of the work that we do every day as social workers and social service workers. But certainly means showing up and arriving from a place of not knowing. This is actually a quote from Dr. Rita Sharon. I was honored to meet Rita. She's actually the founder of narrative medicine at Columbia University. She talks about the fact that, specifically in healthcare, creativity is not elective. It's actually absolutely necessary. But creativity and doubt are really at the core of our work. Every time we meet an individual and family, how do we take creative and compassionate approaches to support them? Always arriving from a place of not knowing. We're not experts. Although we may have the experience and understand the resources, the systems, the context, how do we take creative approaches and embracing that doubt to show up and provide compassionate care? Rita highlighted this quote by Van Gogh, saying, "I'm always doing what I cannot do yet in order to learn how to do it." I think that's brilliant. It's a reminder to normalize any anxiety or uncertainty we have as we approach the care that we offer individuals and families. And this next quote is from one of my favorite people, although I haven't met Dr. Brené Brown. For those that have not yet seen her TED Talk on vulnerability, I'd like to assign it as homework. But in that talk, Brene highlights this, that vulnerability is not weakness. And that myth is profoundly dangerous. Vulnerability is actually the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. As social workers and social service workers, we are absolutely meeting people at their most vulnerable places. But certainly as clinicians and educators, we too can feel vulnerable as we arrive in these spaces to meet people. I think it's a gentle reminder that that vulnerability is not weakness. And how do we use that? Embracing our strengths and explore innovation, creativity, and change, and perhaps how we deliver care. I wanted to highlight this. Innovation doesn't have to be onerous. You don't have to apply for a grant or a randomized control trial. Innovation really is simply the introduction of something new, a new idea, method, or device. So what are new ways we can approach the care that we offer to individuals and families specifically facing serious illness, dying, and death? I think we face this pressure in terms of barriers, organizationally, even in terms of systems. One of the most dangerous phrases in the English language can be, we've always done it this way. We don't need to try anything new. I think that presents an opportunity. And as advocates, as social workers and social service workers, I think that's a brilliant invitation. It means this, stepping outside of our comfort zone, because I'm a big believer in this as a clinician and as an educator. Because for me, this is where the magic happens. So how do we do that and arrive in places feeling vulnerable and not knowing? I had the privilege of meeting Franco Stasesky, the co-founder of Zen Hospice in San Francisco, and he talks about the fact that we should do our utmost to compassionately embrace suffering, but more specifically, stepping out from behind the protection of our roles. It's about how we care for others, how we journey alongside them with a sense of humility and compassion. For me, certainly, and for all of us in this space, as social workers and social service workers, it's about really focusing on person and family-centered care. And while that's a newer concept in healthcare, it's really the basic tenets of our practice. It always has been. So how do we arrive and understand who and what's important to an individual and their loved ones? It means starting with this. What do you understand? There's so much information to process from so many different sources and disciplines. How do people process and digest and metabolize that information? How do we ensure they've heard everything that they've been told? Being that coping with life-limiting illness is indeed a process throughout the illness experience, I think this is an important point to revisit, to ensure that people are having their questions answered and concerns addressed. But this is always a great way to start a conversation with people. And then, using silence as a therapeutic tool. I love this quote. I love listening. It's one of the only spaces where you can be still and moved at the same time. How do we use silence or listening as a therapeutic tool, creating safe spaces for people to share their wishes, their worries, their concerns? And I think that leads to this. 3 simple questions as conversation starters. And certainly these are questions I've posed to kids as young as 4 and adults of all ages. What does someone wonder about? Is there something that they're worried about? Is there something that they're wishing for? How do we explore meaning and support people throughout this experience? Now, this next slide is actually from a group that I was running with a group of kids and teens, all of whom had a parent diagnosed with cancer. This is not my writing. This is a writing of a 12-year-old girl. And as you can see, it was a joint initiative because you can see there's illustrations in the top corner. So in this room, I had 15 kids ranging in ages of 4 to 16 years of age. And they got in small groups of 3. And they shared their wonders, what they were wishing for, and what they were worried about. Certainly, it's a reminder that if we create safe spaces for people to share what they're wondering about, what they're worried about, or what they're wishing for, it's an invitation. And these kids didn't hesitate to jump into this project and share freely. What this also did was normalize their questions, but also created a safe space, reducing isolation for them, knowing that they weren't alone in this. And as you can see, some of these kids were wondering if their parent might even die. For many kids or teens or parents, one of the most common issues I see is that people protect the ones they love. They don't want to be a burden. They don't want to worry their family members. So oftentimes they'll keep their questions to themselves because they don't want to be a bother. They don't want to upset someone. So creating opportunities to explore questions and then using this as a starting point to find out what questions can we answer at this point in time, who do we need to turn to answer some questions, and what questions can't be answered, and how do we wonder alongside kids, teens, and adults throughout this experience. It's also a reminder that certainly from time of diagnosis with a life-limiting illness, people experience a number of fears. These were fears these kids shared in that group that one evening. But again, it's an important reminder that we continue to check in with individuals and families of all ages to explore what fears they may have. Certainly, I met people who were not referred to palliative care and were so fearful of dying in pain. But once connected with the pain and symptom management team, which is often incidentally what many hospitals call palliative care teams because they try to avoid using the word palliative care. You may also hear the word supportive care. For me, the connotation then is that the rest of care is unsupportive. I'm a big believer in using the word and then providing education and context. But certainly for many people, exploring their fears or what they may be worrying about gives us an opportunity to find out how do we respond to those fears? What can we do to assist in care planning, coordination of resources, and support? So this is a wonderful opportunity to begin that conversation. And lastly, wish. What do people hope for? Certainly people balance hope throughout this experience. Some people knowing that they're going to die, some people never arrive at that place. It's not our role, certainly, to force that information or acceptance, but certainly, really, it is, I believe, our role to explore what people are wishing for. What is it that gives them quality of life and meaning? And certainly, for one young mom I happened to ask that question to, she normally would go camping across the country in the summer with her partner and her kids. I happened to meet her in an acute palliative care unit. So my follow-up question was, well, how big is your tent? Because she happened to be in a former semi-private room that was now a private room. And she quizzically said, not that big, why do you ask? And I said, would it fit right here? She said, yeah, why? And I said, well, what if we were to arrange a sleepover and set your tent up in your room this weekend, but also make sure you and your partner and your kids have access to the rooftop garden for a campfire with marshmallows, minus the fire? That was something that was so incredibly meaningful for her. It's something that I immediately rushed out to and spoke to security about organizing and the team and made it happen. Regardless of what someone's wishing for, big or small, I think it's incumbent upon us to explore what that is. It's really about this. What gives our lives meaning? And certainly that's important as we support individuals and families facing life-limiting illness, end of life, and into bereavement, but that's essential for us as care providers as well. This is not something that should be reserved for end of life. This is something we all need to consider now. Self-reflective practice and self-care is essential parts of what we do. It's also looking at legacy for those we support. I think it's important that we need to start treating our death as part of our legacy instead of the end of it. This is actually a quote from a resource called You'reGoingToDie.com. They actually take quite a comical approach to it, so I encourage you to take a look online if you'd like to learn more. But in terms of legacy work, back even when I was working in the hospital system, I learned from my brilliant colleagues at the Dr. J. Children's Grief Center about this legacy project they were doing in the community with families. Knowing that I was seeing families who were isolated, who were avoiding conversations for fear or uncertainty or not knowing what to say, I used this as an opportunity to bring entire families together of all ages. And really, asking those initial questions, what do you understand about? And then exploring what they're wondering about, worried about, and wishing for, gave the family an opportunity to share their hopes, fears, and concerns. But then also, this was an opportunity to connect and to share what meant most to them. What this is actually, instead of making a personalized scarf, it's like a personalized hug. And as you can see in these photos, this was from a free event I hosted at the Burlington Art Gallery, open to the public. It was advertised as a legacy project, and someone can either lay on the ground, which many people did in the hospital or in the clinic setting, and you can see also in the top corner, you can also do this seated in a chair. Quite often, I would do this when people are bedbound. But as you can see, it's engaging the entire family through touch and connection. And the mere action of making this hug is extraordinary. But then after someone traces their arms, they decorate them with images or messages of that shared connection, and then exchange them as a lasting memento. These hugs have been taken to school or work or chemo daycare, but these hugs are also buried or cremated with people after they die. And what that means to loved ones, knowing that their hugs can forever stay with their family member, is extraordinary. All you need for this project are willing participants, some bed sheets, markers, and scissors. That's it. And the therapeutic benefit of this experience is extraordinary. So certainly that's just in individual clinical spaces, how we can respond to individuals and families, but I think it's also important to explore how we promote care within our communities. It's important to recognize that sadly, only 16 to 30% of Canadians who are dying currently have access to or receive hospice palliative care services, regardless of where they live in the country. And it's important to know that even fewer receive grief and bereavement support. Now, I wanted to mention for those that aren't aware of it yet, actually, thankfully, the Senate passed legislation back in December to look at developing a PanCanadian approach, a framework to developing palliative care across Canada. That means improving access to care, that means developing standards in care, but it also means developing standards in education and training for all care providers. Now, if you're curious, I encourage you to take a look at Health Canada, because right now this is open for public consultation. You can share your voice and let the government know what's important to you about creating access. Because we are advocates as social workers and social service workers, and certainly are ideally suited for this work. Certainly within our scope of practice, it talks about the fact that assessment, treatment, evaluation of individual, interpersonal, and societal problems through the use of our knowledge, skills, and interventions, as well as strategies, are essential in assisting individuals, dyads, families, groups, organizations, and communities to achieve optimum psychosocial and social functioning. This is an article from a group of Canadian researchers that really highlights creating social work competencies for practice in hospice palliative care. I hope this absolutely resonates with social service workers too, because our unique perspectives as it relates to palliative and end-of-life care reflect the fact that in our work, we take a holistic approach. And it's drawing on that ecological approach to problem solving that considers the multidimensional impact of individual, family, and sociocultural influences in our daily experiences. What that means is social workers and social service workers, we are ideally suited to support families in this context. And this is the report. If you'd like to learn more, it's available for free through the Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association, and it's really highlighting Canadian social work competencies in hospice palliative care, highlighting the framework for education and practice. Again, I believe this will also resonate with social service workers, so I don't mean to be exclusionary. I'm just reading the name of a document. But as you can see, the competencies speak to all of us. What I wanted to briefly share was how, beyond my clinical practice, what I also do in terms of compassionate community initiatives. And certainly I believe compassionate community initiatives and programs are essential to promote community capacity building, advocacy, education and information sharing, and absolutely citizen engagement and empowerment. How do we help people to make informed choices and have informed conversations? So I wanted to briefly share with you some of the initiatives that I'm a part of. Has anyone heard of the Death Cafe? Excellent. Well, for those that haven't, I encourage you to take a look. There's a brilliant site online. It actually began as an initiative in the UK. The Death Cafe is actually a social franchise. It's a free event, and it creates safe space to normalize conversations about living and dying. It can be offered anywhere at any time and is always accessible to the general public. So what's it look like? It's pretty extraordinary, actually. Quite often, it's strangers by and large that arrive, either solo, maybe with one friend. But it's remarkable to see these complete strangers come together at events. It's open to and respectful of people from all communities and belief systems. And the objective of a Death Cafe, I think, is an important message: to increase awareness of death with a view to helping people make the most of our finite lives. No illusions. But it's also very clearly not advertised as a grief support or counseling session, but really a group-directed discussion of death. These are actually pictures from the last 2 events I hosted in my own community. I always offer these as free public events, and I coordinate them with specific events related to hospice palliative care. Namely, Advanced Care Planning Day. Did you know that was a thing? I know, Hallmark does not mark the occasion with a card, but National Advanced Care Planning Day occurs every year, April 16th. I could do a whole other side presentation on that, but I won't. I'd encourage you, anyone who'd like to learn more about the importance of advanced care planning and having informed conversations, there's actually a Canadian website called Speak Up that has territory and province-specific resources to guide you through these conversations for yourself, for your loved ones, but certainly for people you're caring for. These resources are available for free. So I provide resources related to Advanced Care Planning Day, but also hospice palliative care. So I've hosted 5 events in my own community over the last 2.5 years, and average between 20 to 40 people, and always have a wait list. There's lots of laughter and brilliant conversations. But I'd also like to share some of the other volunteer compassionate initiatives that I'm a part of, because collaboration is essential in this work. I'm honored to be a new community partner in the last year with the Children and Youth Grief Network. If anyone hasn't heard of them, I encourage you to take a look online. Our mission at the CYGN is to advocate for educational opportunities and support services that will benefit children and youth who are grieving the dying or death of someone they care about. Certainly, we appreciate, and evidence backs us up, that youth desire inclusion and honest information both prior to and following the death of a loved one. The CYGN certainly looks at delivering evidence-based tools and resources to support clinicians and educators, as well as individuals and families in this process. And it is a brilliant collaboration. These are currently a list of the CYGN partners. Some of you may be familiar with some of these organizations. If not, I encourage you to take a look online. Every single one of the CYGN partners offers free resources and support to grieving children, teens, and families. But as a collective, we've developed some extraordinary resources. I wanted to briefly show a photo from one of the free public events we hosted in collaboration with, or in support of, Children's Grief Awareness Day. This was a free family event. We offered one in Oakville and one in Brampton, open to any grieving family with children or teens who'd experienced the death of a parent, caregiver, or sibling. Not only was it well attended, the CYGN also believes in data collection and evaluation. Because this was a group of clinicians coming together saying, you know what, we haven't done this before in our own community, but we believe we can do it. So we did, together as a collective effort. If you'd like to consider hosting and organizing one of these events in your own community, the CYGN has a toolkit that you can actually contact them and they'll send to you for free. Looking at the evidence, the data collection, but also how, where, when, and why it's important to offer these free public events to grieving families across communities. Again, as mentioned, that's a free resource. I also wanted to share another compassionate community initiative I'm part of. This is called the 100% Certainty Project. Death, something to talk about. Certainly, I'm honored to be part of the Division of Palliative Care at McMaster University, and this initiative is a collaborative effort between the Division of Palliative Care, Dougherty Funeral Home, the Hamilton Public Library, an independent bookseller in Hamilton, and a local hospice. We're adding new partners, because this collaboration has been brilliant. And really, the focus is on using books with themes of death, dying, bereavement, and loss to spark dialogue. The project absolutely attempts to demedicalize the experience of death and dying and engage the general public. So I wanted to briefly share some of the events we offered in this past year. Again, all of these are free public events. If anyone knows Julia Samuel, she just recently released a book in the last year called Grief Works, Stories of Life, Death, and Surviving. We hosted an evening at the Hamilton Public Library with Julia Samuel, and almost 200 people attended to talk about living and dying and grief. Recognizing that healthcare providers and healthcare students also face grief and loss in the work that they do and not always receive the support, education, or training. In support of another book, certainly highly recommended. I'd say it's homework, but you might not feel like reading a book this weekend, When Breath Becomes Air, written by a young neurosurgeon who is facing living and dying with advanced cancer. We also, after featuring the book, showed the TED Talk from his wife, Dr. Lucy Kalinathy. If you don't know about her, I encourage you to take a look online. But then in follow-up to that, we hosted a Death Cafe with almost 70 healthcare students and providers in attendance talking about how to make the most of our finite lives and showing up to do this work. We also, in conjunction with the book Tuesdays with Maury, hosted a series of events on Tuesday evenings. This was at another location of one of the public libraries and was open to the public for free. This was facilitated by 2 rabbis, a geriatrician, and a community hospice provider. Every event was fully booked. And lastly, our final event of the year was featuring the short documentary Extremis, which is actually available on Netflix. If you haven't seen Extremis and you're curious what happens in an ICU, I encourage you to watch it. Extremis follows a physician, Dr. Jessica Nuddick-Sitter, who happens to be Canadian but is practicing in California, follows her and the team as they work with families facing life-limiting illness, death, and loss in the ICU. It's only 24 minutes. It's actually nominated for an Oscar. But that night, we showed the documentary. We also, because this was in conjunction with Advanced Care Planning Day, highlighted some advanced care planning resources, but then we had a panel discussion of an ICU physician, a palliative care physician, and myself, answering questions and speaking about facing dying, grief, and loss. Now, certainly these are incredible public opportunities for people to attend free of charge, to have safe spaces to talk about living and dying. But what's it look like in grief and bereavement? What I'd like to share with you next is something about Camp Erin. Camp Erin, for those of you that don't know, is a free weekend bereavement camp for kids and teens between the ages of 6 and 17 who are grieving the loss of a parent or caregiver or sibling. Being that this is a free weekend bereavement camp, we rely on volunteers. I'm honored to have volunteered with Camp Erin for years before I became the clinical director for Camp Erin Hamilton last year. I'm about to show you a video of Camp Erin Hamilton. I'm showing this to you for a number of reasons. One, the video shows you the opportunity that kids and teens can have to support them in coping with grief and loss. And certainly recognizing the physical, emotional, spiritual, and cognitive impact of grief and loss, while also giving them outlets to process and metabolize those losses. I'm showing you also, because if you have kids or teens you'd like to refer, there are only 4 Camp Erins in Canada, in Hamilton, Toronto, Cornwall, and Montreal. If you'd like to learn more about any of them, if you'd like to apply to volunteer, or if you'd like to refer a child or teen, I encourage you to take a look online.
My mom passed away when I was 6, and here she is. And she passed away of breast cancer, and I really loved her.
This is my dad and my uncle. They both died because they killed themselves.
This is my mom. She died of cancer in December.
It's actually a really good experience. I've been able to try things that I've never really been able to try before. I got to meet a lot of new people that really have been through what I've been through that I really wouldn't think that they've been through. And I'm hoping to keep those relationships for the future.
other people that lost their mom or their dad, and they've been going through that I've been going through, so they've been having a hard time too. It's a great camp, and that if you feel like you're going to be pressured about doing something, you don't have to worry about that, because they ask if you do, and if you don't, they say it's okay, which I like about it. So.
Everybody stop paddling, okay? Go, go.
It's Camp Aaron, and we go to a cabin with like a few, like 4 or 5 kids, depending on how many. And we have about like 2, 3 coach dudes that help us and take us to all the fishing, and rock climbing wall's fun.
We're setting up for a luminary service. It's a special ceremony in which children remember their loved one, and that the flames represent that the flame never goes out in their heart.
So what we're going to do is we're going to make these boxes, and we're going to put all our memories inside these boxes.
My favorite part was putting up the pictures on the window, because I could feel how everyone else is feeling. It kind of made me emotional, because I realized how everyone else is in the same situation. Take the big jump. I'd say when my dad passed, I didn't want to try anything. I'm like, nothing will help. Like, this is all just useless. Like, why should I go to this camp? I mean, it's not gonna make him come back to life or anything. The fact is they're not. But you want to spread the word about how great of a person they were, and I think that just take that risk. Say yes instead of no.
I wanted to briefly share that video with you simply because it highlights the fact that, much like working in hospice palliative care, while there is absolutely grief and loss, there is so much joy and love. So Camp Aaron is a really extraordinary opportunity to create safe spaces for kids and teens to express that grief and loss, and moreover, to reduce the isolation they feel, to support them, bringing together communities of others who appreciate what the experience is like. And really, I think as social workers and social service workers, it's how we creatively approach those opportunities to support people from time of diagnosis throughout their illness experience, at end of life, and into bereavement. And I like this quote from Dr. B.J. Miller, who, for those of you who don't know who he is, has an extraordinary TED Talk demystifying palliative care. I've had the honor of meeting B.J. Miller, and as a follow-up to Extremis, the producer has just released a new film on Netflix called Endgame, and B.J.'s one of the physicians profiled in that. But B.J. Miller talks about the fact that there's nothing inherently medical about dying. It's so much larger than medicine. It's purely human. And I think part of this mission, part of our mission as social workers and social service workers, is to keep all of this couched in humanity. We don't have to do this work alone. This is a quote from Dr. Rachel Remen from her book, Kitchen Table Wisdom. She talks about the fact that the most important questions don't seem to have ready answers, but the questions themselves have a healing power when they're shared. An answer is an invitation to stop thinking about something, to stop wondering. Life has no such stopping places. Life is a process whose every event is connected to the moment that just went by. An unanswered question is a fine traveling companion. It sharpens your eye for the road. Again, a reminder that we don't have to journey alone, that whether we connect with colleagues within our program, within our institutions, across communities, the opportunity is important to connect and support individuals and families facing serious illness throughout their experience and into end of life and bereavement, while also supporting ourselves. I wanted to share briefly highlighting some of these resources. If you'd like to learn more about hospice palliative care or some of the resources, I encourage you to take a look at these organizations online. And lastly, I wanted to share a couple of resources. I appreciate some of you have already taken some of these from the table. There are lots more. I have some, actually I arranged to bring one for everyone in attendance today. Apologies to those on the live stream. You can take a look online though. I'd like to thank Canadian Virtual Hospice for providing these. For those that don't know about Canadian Virtual Hospice, it is the largest online repository of information supporting individuals and families facing life-limiting illness, dying, grief, and bereavement, but also supporting clinicians, educators, and researchers. This first resource is Living My Culture, and it's interviewing people from different cultures, speaking about the role of culture, religion, faith, or spirituality in coping with illness, death, and bereavement. I also wanted to share this next resource, mygrief.ca, an online resource for people to access grief support and resources. As you can see, the last point on the slide also says it's a resource for professionals. Anybody can access this, people in your care, but you yourself. This is a free resource. And again, I have the takeaway here. And the last one, I'm honored to have been a part of this development team for kids' grief. This is a resource for parents or caregivers, for any care provider working with grieving kids or teens as they're coping with a loved one dying, at time of death, or after someone has died. It has some really great tips, tools, and conversation starters. A reminder as well about Camp Erin. I encourage you to take a look at any of the Canadian locations, and thankfully there are a couple of other Canadian camps, although, as mentioned, bereavement support is rare in the community. Although I do have some of the CYGN partners have given me resources, so I encourage you to help yourself up here because there certainly are grief and bereavement resources within the GTA that people can access. Lastly, I wanted to share this. Very proud to have contributed to this resource. The CYGN just released recently. This is a free resource anybody can access. So it's a matter of contacting the Children and Youth Grief Network and requesting this handbook for supporters. It gives you tips, tools, evidence-based approaches to support grieving kids and teens prior to the death of a loved one, but certainly after a death. So if you're curious and you'd like to access this resource, please contact the Children and Youth Grief Network. This is a free resource for any care provider. So more than anything, I'd like to thank you all for doing the work. I wanted to try and identify some of the taboos and misconceptions around palliative care, but certainly normalize the fact that as social workers and social service workers, we are so well positioned to support people in this context. It's just about showing up even if you don't know what to say or do, and not being afraid to care. So thank you all for being here and for not being afraid to care.